Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Rated, where today we're going to take a look at the fourth episode of... That's right, we're going to take a look at the fourth episode of Ms. Marvel today, Seeing Red, where we get to we get a little bit more info on everything that's going on. It's pretty good backfilling kind of episode. On the one hand, I feel like we got better information in this episode than we did in the last. Though it does have that feeling of like, okay, we're just loading up more and more and more characters and more factions to what's going on here. The most significant new arrival, I guess you could say, to this entire equation is the arrival of the Red Daggers. I'm not particularly familiar, so I'm not super familiar with either Captain Marvel or Ms. Marvel from the comics, and I don't really know their sphere of related characters and aliases and all of these things. The Red Daggers essentially appear to be a collective, quote unquote. It might literally just be two people. It's a little hard to tell here. But it's basically highly trained warriors, assassins perhaps, who wear a kind of a red scarf over their face and assume the mantle of the Red Dagger. It is in some ways similar to Black Panther. It is in some ways similar to DC's Red Hood in a certain sense. But we very early into this episode interact with, oh my God, oh no, what is his name? I wrote it down. Kareem. I was going to say Hakeem. Kareem, who interacts with Kamala right away. They have a fight and then realize like, we're not actually enemies. We got to get the hell out of here as the cops show up because we relatively early. I'm kind of jumping ahead. There's actually a really good first half of this episode, but I do want to start out just kind of, completing the introduction to the Red Daggers, I suppose. Kamala is really interested in learning more about the train that she saw in her vision at the end of episode 2, at the end of episode 3. It was the last episode. This is what happens when I take the weekend off in between these. The end of episode 3, Kamala sees the vision of the train. Kamala and Najma, and also her grandmother Sana all have the vision of the train. And we arrive in Karachi. And so Kamala is interested in learning more about the train. She's kind of asking now and then about the train station, and she wants to go and see it. We get to see some of her cousins. I don't know if they're like distant cousins or like directly just other grandchildren of Sana. But they, show Kamala around, and eventually they separate, and she gets to check out the Karachi station, where she encounters Kareem. And they, wind up running off, and he shows her essentially what the deal is with the Red Daggers, and that each person in there is known as Red Dagger or the Red Dagger, and it turns out that they know quite a bit about the clandestines. I feel like clandestine, I think, is more of a European and Eastern, like I feel like clandestine is more of like a specifically American pronunciation, and clandestine is like everywhere else. It feels weird saying clandestine, even though basically everybody on the show says clandestine. But the clandestine, so we learn a couple things. One, they're not really Jinn exactly. They are Jinn in the same way that Thor and the Asgardians are gods, which was a clearer statement to make before Thor Love and Thunder came out, which we'll talk about very soon. Because up until Love and Thunder, the implication that was being made was that anyone who was referred to as a god was just a super powerful being from space somewhere who was worshipped for just generally being a really powerful being and like, whoa, that's crazy. And the clandestines are kind of similar to that. When we were introduced to them originally, they called themselves a number of different names, along with the Unseen, and Jinn. And we wind up getting told, recited, I guess, a text that's in Urdu, I think, where Mr. Khan, this is in the previous episode, where Mr. Khan reads from some of from some of the research that Bruno was doing. Essentially a story about the Jinn being exiled and trying to get back to their world, but we'll destroy the world if you had it. Like, it's essentially, here's kind of the lean forward of like, here's what the Jinn are going to do if they get back. But they're not really Jinn exactly, but they are creatures from, I say creatures, they are residents of the Noor dimension, as it's referred to. And Noor meaning light, so we do have a light dimension, and I think this is probably the first time we get a really clear, like, unless you really super analyze the stinger from Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where Cleo just kind of like rips open literally the fabric of the universe and walks through it to the dark dimension. It was kind of hard to tell what was going on there, and now we get a slightly clearer picture. So one of the hardest things in fiction when you start dealing with weird interdimensional time travel multiversal stuff is what counts as a different universe, what counts as a different timeline, and what counts as a different dimension. They get very intertwined and very tangled up, and sometimes they kind of all smash into each other without like a really obvious distinction between them. In the MCU, the multiverse and branching timelines appear to basically be one thing. The multiverse it consists of all of these branching timelines, and the timelines that we now have branching out are a result of He Who Remains being killed and no longer having all of these extra timelines being trimmed, all these branches. So now the multiverse is open, meaning we have multiple timelines. What that meant for dimensions was a lot less clear. It's also less clear if the other dimensions are in the multiverse, if they are outside of the multiverse, if they also have their own timelines that are branching out. Are they interrelated? It's not super clear, but we get this cool visual of a literalization, I guess you could say, of essentially there's a veil that separates the real world from the Noor dimension. And if the veil is pulled down using the bangle to allow the clandestines to return home, the Noor dimension will overtake the real world and will result in the destruction of at least the planet, possibly the universe. It was very unclear. It won't be good. But it's presented as being like the two worlds exist in the same place, and there's a veil that separates them. And it's like, okay, it's not a literal veil. It's not a physical veil. It's maybe more of like a metaphysical veil. And the explanation we get just prior to this visualization is a different one that's like a less useful visualization, but a better explanation, essentially, of that both worlds exist in the same place. And I think my interpretation of that is that the dark dimension where Dormammu resides and where Doctor Strange and Cleo ran off to in the stinger of Multiverse of Madness also exists in the same place. And I guess dimensions are essentially like phases, I guess, of the universe that you can kind of jump between. And it kind of works as like, I mean, in a sense, the word dimension, it's sort of like you're hopping. Imagine like moving in a fifth dimension where it's like, okay, you've got space in 3 dimensions. You got time as a fourth. What is the fifth? I don't know. But if you move in that dimension, if you move in that direction, you enter a new dimension or something. Like, I don't know. It makes enough sense in my head. I don't know if it's very sensical outside of my head, but it's cool to have seen that. I'm very curious if there ever is going to be an interaction between the Noor dimension and the dark dimension. Are they related? Are they totally separate from each other? Do they matter at all? Who knows? Similar to the previous episode, we do get a lot of information, like really rapid fire. Last time I said I felt like episode 3 really should have been like 2 episodes to stretch that out and to get that information across. I feel similarly about this episode, but not as strongly. I think episodes 3 and 4 could have done with at least one more episode among them to build it up a little bit more. I don't know how they would have done it is the problem, because the first half of this episode kind of is a breather from the previous episode, but there's also a little bit, there's some space at the end. Like the last half of the episode brings the action back and brings the, intrigue and intensity and all of that. The first half of the episode is a lot more of a character piece, you could say, where Kamala and Muniba arrive in Karachi. They meet their cousins, and along with them, they also meet Sana. So Kamala's grandmother, Muniba's mother, and you get a lot of, you get kind of, it's a useful spot when it comes to storytelling of being able to show three generations at the same time, because you get to see some kind of mirrors, I guess, right, of how Sana and Muniba interact compared with how we've already seen Muniba and Kamala interact. So you see some reflections of that on both sides there. But it's not a perfect like one-to-one. It's not like, Sana is like super doting over Muniba, and Muniba is now super, and not doting, but like maybe helicoptering a little bit. I don't know. You kind of get the sense, you get told pretty directly that when Muniba was a child, Sana was obsessed with presumably the bangle, but especially all these wild theories about other dimensions and creatures from these other dimensions and traveling to them and all this magical light and all of this stuff. And essentially it turned Sana and Muniba into like social outcasts, pariahs, to the point where the whole reason that Muniba actually like left to go to America ultimately was because she just wanted to get away from that. She wanted to start her life over and not be known as the daughter of this crazy person by everyone that she knew. And like we get earlier in the episode, we find out like, oh, Muniba was a bit of a rebel, and you think that it's going to be like, oh, so she was like Kamala, and she was kind of like the same sort of like cool kid trying to just like rebel against her parents a little bit, but not like be a bad kid, but just kind of, that's how that works. But you kind of get the opposite sense as you go, where it's like, okay, no, she was just trying to like, I don't know, live her life, and she rebelled against her mother because her mother was trying to pull her into these daydreams and fantastical kind of things, or at least what seemed like daydreams and fantasy and all that. It does give Kamala and Muniba a good opportunity to, mend some of their issues. At the moment, Muniba is mad at Kamala because she pulled the fire alarm at her brother's wedding, and she still hasn't really told her the reason why. It's unclear whether Kamala, like I would imagine it's basically Kamala doesn't think Muniba will believe her, even though it'd be extremely easy to prove it. She doesn't really know what's going on. Maybe she doesn't want to get her mother involved because of the clandestines, and now it's dangerous. They sort of bond over some toffee. Muniba is a woman after my own heart, and she loves toffee. I love toffee. I don't know why. It's like so different from all the other like sweet things that I actually like, but she apparently loved toffee growing up, to the point where Sana, since Muniba left, so for probably in the ballpark of like 15 to 20 years, has been buying box after box of toffee constantly, just so that she'd have some toffee for when Muniba came back one day. So this is the first time Muniba's actually been back to Karachi since she originally left. But her and Kamala kind of bond over that. Kamala does not seem as interested in toffee. Also, definitely never bite toffee with your front teeth. Oh God, no. That's a great way to pull those teeth right out of your head. You wouldn't want to chew on a Charleston chew with your front teeth. You definitely don't want to chew on toffee with your front teeth either. You want to like kind of push it to the back, let the big guys do the work. But anyway, so the next day after all of this, her and the cousins looking around town, she leaves to go to Karachi Station. Her cousins are really like not interested in spending that much time with her. Like they're related and they're not just going to like totally, whatever. But there's kind of they kind of look down on her a little bit because essentially she has no connections, or at least from their perception of it, she has no connections to her roots. She has no real connection to, like, she understands at least parts of her Pakistani heritage, but she doesn't really, get Pakistan. Like, she doesn't really get living there or any of that. And so she's like bewildered by the stuff that she's seeing and looking around at, and they're kind of like, looking down their noses at her a little bit, which, I mean, it's a real thing. That's something that goes on when folks are kind of detached from their roots and things and trying to get back into it. There's some friction there. And so, like, it's an interesting kind of sequence to see. Like, they're not horrible to her about it. They're just kind of like teasy, I guess. And then when she asks, like, hey, can you show me Karachi Station? They're like, nope, but have fun, I guess. She's like, oh, okay, well, this is going to go well. But yeah, she winds up there. She runs into Kareem. She gets to meet Kareem's friends. And they have a little, like, bonfire thing with like out on, I think it was like a beach or something. And are there any beaches in Pakistan? It's probably like this is like the southwest portion, maybe. I don't know. I'm terrible with geography. But she meets Waleed, who is, I think, either the leader of or the elder of. Elder meaning like not elder of two. The elder and younger meaning of elder, not like, oh, he's the elder of this large. But he is the guy on top with the red daggers. And very shortly, extremely abruptly, after Kamala gets the information about the Noor dimension, the clandestines just kind of show up. Like, they literally come in through the ceiling, and I'm assuming that it's done with wire work, and it wasn't super convincing. It was very like, yes, let's fight. Like, they came down very, it was so sudden that I actually like had to pause because I was laughing. It was just out of nowhere. But there's a lot of fighting. They do like a car chase with a cart and a bus and all of these things all through, the city. Waleed appears to get stabbed and potentially killed, as do a couple of the clandestines. It's kind of unclear because at the very end of the episode, the Najma winds up striking the bangle with her weapon. All of the clandestines have really cool weapons, by the way. One of them has essentially a whip made from his belt. Another one has a spear. One of them, I think it was Adam. It's a very specific kind of weapon, and I know that it's got a specific name, and I cannot remember it, but it's generally fairly ornate. It's like a morning star, but not spiked. And it looks like it's made of like a brass-like material. Oh, it's essentially a really ornate club. And I want to say it's usually like shaped and weighted in a way that it can be spun around to kind of maneuver it a little bit easily. But that was a cool one to see. I wish I remember the name of it. But yeah, the battles are getting more intense. They're still kind of separate in their own weird ways. I think this was filmed in 2020, so they were still needing to be very careful about how they choreographed and had stuff. Like, everything still kind of feels like it's cordoned off a little bit. I was actually kind of impressed. There's a point where they get into a dead end, and it's like, oh no, it's a dead end. What do we do? And they just kind of turn around and they get into their fighting stance. And you've seen this scene in like 100 movies where they get ready. Here we go. And then the bad guys show up and they look around. They're like, huh. They turn around and leave. But no, they show up and the good guys are still standing there, and then they just fight. And it's like, oh, okay. All right, we're actually just going to have this fight. That's cool. I'm down for that. It's like it was a weird subversion on the usual trope that gets played up there of like, oh, they're going to be like up in the rafters doing one of these or something to prevent, like, no, it's like, no, they're just going to fight. But yeah, the bangle gets struck and Kamala winds up, as far as we can tell, transported far into the past. It's unclear if this is real or a vision or what, but she appears to be at a train station with like nearby a bunch of trains headed for Karachi, and we are left to assume that this is 1947, that this is the tail end of, the partition, essentially, as we're waiting for the last train out of Karachi. Of course, not just one train, it's like 10 trains all crowding up and trying to go. People, sticking out of windows and on the roofs and stuff. And obviously there were a lot of really bad things that happened on those trains during that transition period, I guess you could say. So that's where we're left at the end of this. It was honestly kind of a neat bookend in a way that it wasn't the beginning of the episode, but like the beginning of the actual conflict portion of the episode. So about halfway through, maybe a little bit earlier, we're bookending Kamala arriving at Karachi station and then ending the episode essentially at the other end of that line. Like, she's by the trains that are headed for Karachi station in 1947. I thought that was kind of a neat way of kind of bringing that back together there. I should mention too, we're getting less and less of the Department of Damage Control as the show goes on, which isn't a bad thing. It's fine. It's so the clandestines got arrested or detained or what have you at the end of the previous episode, and they break out here and they leave. Oh my God. Oh no, I've forgotten his name now too. Her son, Najma's son, Kamran, yes. Kamran gets left behind. She's like, nope, he made his choice. He's out of the gang, basically. But it got me thinking too about like, okay, so we've got the Department of Damage Control ostensibly is supposed to be the one helping clean up after superhero battles to help, revive the cities and fix them up after things are going on. But these guys, the agents that we've seen, Agent Deaver and the other one, almost seem to be kind of a rogue SHIELD faction, if anything. Like, it seems like they're way more invested in, like, oh, we got to track this person down. We still don't fully know the reason that she's being tracked down. They don't seem like good folks generally, so, we're being led to believe that it's not going to be a good thing if they get their hands on her. But we don't really know the details. We've got DODC. We had SHIELD. I don't know what the state of SHIELD is in the series at this point. I think Nick Fury showed up for Tony Stark's funeral. And I think at least in the Agents of SHIELD show, I believe SHIELD did come back, essentially. Not as large, but it was like a smaller, more tight-knit organization for security's sake. I don't know how public they are. Coulson obviously still is not very public, though. At this point, I think Coulson is actually dead now, or did he retire? I don't know. But regardless, there's also S.W.O.R.D., which seems to be specifically looking at extraterrestrial activity. So we've got a lot of like balls in the air. I'll be curious to see how DODC gets used in the future, including in what's left of this season, just because like we're starting to bloat out our government agencies a little bit. There's a lot of that going on where it's like, okay, so are people going to cross and like need to deal with that too? So yeah, it was a good episode. I still feel like they're blazing through it. The more this season goes on, the more I feel like it probably should have been like an 8-episode show, maybe even a 9-episode show. I'm not really sure yet, but we're really kind of flying through it. The characters are all, honestly, the acting has been universally good throughout this show. I don't think anybody has put in a bad performance so far. The casting has been phenomenal. The acting has been incredible. Everyone's been putting in 110% and it comes out great. The acting is awesome. I think the writing is just like so fast paced that there's points where it's like, oh, like 8 things just happened and we're just got to keep up. It's one of the downsides, I guess, to doing miniseries style shows as opposed to like when we get Daredevil. I think that's going to be a 13-episode show, which is going to be the longest show that the MCU has ever done at this point. The longest previously was 10 for What If, I think. I'm trying to remember because I think there were a few 9s. I think WandaVision was 9. Actually, I probably have some of this right in front of me. WandaVision was 9. What If was also 9. And I guess She-Hulk was 9. I thought there were 10. Maybe there were supposed to be 10 for What If, and one of them got held back for season 2. Ironically, the one that results in Tony and Gamora with the Infinity Stone grinder that winds up mattering in the finale. But yeah, I don't know. I'm liking the show so far. I wish that it had more time to breathe. It took 26 minutes now for the first animation little thing to show up, and I think it was only a one-time thing. I hope it comes back by the end. I feel like it's drifting away, and it was such a nice little... It added a bit of uniqueness to the show that I really appreciated. For this episode, I think I'm going to give it a 7. I think it's a little step up from the last one. The last episode, while it was fun, the wedding was the highlight of that episode for sure. That one felt like so compressed in terms of shitloads of information, unreliable narrators to boot, and then just fight, and it's over. This one has a little bit more. I really like the interactions between Kamala and her mother and her grandmother. The information we're getting about the Noor dimension has been really good. And, you know, they left us on a decent cliffhanger too. Like nothing amazing, I don't think, for this episode, but definitely better than the last one. So I would give it a 7. I would love to hear what you guys think of the episode of Seeing Red. I would love to hear what you think about this video as well. Yeah, I'm really excited for it. We have 2 episodes left. We have the next episode, and then I'll be reviewing Thor: Love and Thunder, and then following that up with the final episode of Ms. Marvel before moving on to what comes after. But yeah, I think they're doing well so far. None of these episodes have dropped me yet. Nothing so far has had me going like, oh no, I'm not. This isn't for me. There's been a couple, like What If had some moments like that. Falcon and the Winter Soldier had some moments like that. So it's like, and it's not like unsalvageable by any means when that does happen, but this has been solid so far. I've really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to where we go with the last 2 episodes. I'm curious where we're going to be in the 1940s here. This should be a very interesting ride. So I'm going to check that out, and I'll catch you guys next time. Have a good one. Bye.